Good evening and welcome to another Mothman podcast. We're your number one source for scientifically unexplained phenomena. We research and dare to discover the truth to questions which science calls unexplainable. Tonight's episode, we're going to talk about the Mothman himself. The Mothman has been known throughout history, and we have recordings of him ever since humans have started making recordings, even on cave walls. There's drawings of Native Americans drawing a creature larger than man with wings with red eyes. It's also found in Egyptian history where there's creatures larger than man having wings and red eyes. The Mothman as we know it today got its name from a situation which took place in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where a creature like this was spotted and seen. And the news media coming into the area called it the Mothman, based on a very popular TV series at that time called The Batman. So it took up the name and it's been called the Mothman since the 1960s. This all took place in a little community called Point Pleasant, West Virginia. It's a small town with a big history. It has a population of around 4,000 occupants, and the area is just 3 miles in diameter. Most of us would not think of this as a city, but in fact it is. A city surrounded by lush green countryside alongside the vast Ohio River and surrounded by a larger-than-life legend. As its name suggests, its character is quiet, peaceful, and above all pleasant. That is, on the surface at least. No one would ever suspect that it was home to one of the most unsettling ordeals of the last half-century, when the paranormal strikes fear into the hearts of many. During the latter half of the 1960s, reports began to surface on a topic of a mysterious and horrifying creature stalking residents on the outskirts and surrounding areas of the town. Encounters with the entity are said to be so frightening that at least one person suffers from psychological trauma, even to today. The first sighting of such an occurrence took place on November the 12th, 1966. We had 5 gravediggers who were working in a local cemetery when they saw what they thought was a human being flying out of a group of trees nearby. They watched this entity for about a minute as it swooped low over their heads and then took off into the distance. They didn't report this to anyone else because they were afraid of what they saw and didn't really know how to explain what they saw. 2 nights later, on the 14th, a resident was home watching his TV when he saw what appeared to be red lights coming from a hovering object over a field near his property. Upon investigation, he realized that the red glowing lights were actually a pair of eyes which belonged to a tall, what he called a human-like entity. The figure was standing on a branch of a tree about 100 yards away when it promptly rose up into the air and flew away over the woods, letting out a blood-curdling scream as it went. The man's dog, a German Shepherd named Bandit, took off in pursuit and was never seen again. The night of the 15th, 2 married couples came running into the sheriff's office in a state of panic and distress. They'd been on the way back from a double date, driving close to the TNT area, which I will explain what that is later, of Point Pleasant when they saw a gray, tall figure standing next to the road. They reported this entity to look like a man, but bigger, possibly 7 foot tall, and it appeared to have a pair of wings folded behind its back. In front of it lied the corpse of a dog, the breed which was never determined, but later assumed to be that of the German Shepherd that had gone missing. As they passed the strange entity, it rose into the air and proceeded to fly up to the car. They panicked and hurriedly sped away at a reported speed of 100 miles per hour, but the creature was able to keep up with the vehicle, matching the vehicle's speed. One of the eyewitness ladies in the vehicle said that it emitted a high-pitched human-like screech as it flew, and it had huge red eyes which glowed like a pair of reflectors. As they entered the town, it broke off the chase and flew back in the direction of the TNT area. Remember, we've had multiple sightings of this entity, and no one has spoken to one another, so there can't be anybody saying that, yeah, I saw what you saw. It was just one of those things where there's multiple entities explaining the same thing. The townspeople called a press conference, and it was held on the 16th. Everyone who'd seen the object or the entity was there. They called in a wildlife expert because the mayor, the town council, business owners all wanted to keep down panic in the community. So they came up with a story that explained this was an abnormally large crane which apparently had been blown off of its migration course. And that was the statement they made to try to keep the panic down. Well, the people and the witnesses said, this can't be the truth because cranes can't grow that large. Scientifically proved. They definitely don't give off a human-like scream. They can't fly at 100 miles an hour. And again, they definitely don't have red glowing eyes. Prior to the newspaper reporting all this coming out the next day on the 16th, there was another sighting which occurred. This was a lady traveling to a friend's house on the outskirts of town. Her name was Marcella Bennett. She had along with her daughter Tina, and they were going to visit the Thompson family. When they pulled into the driveway of the Thompson's property, the car seemed to disturb a large entity, bigger than man. As they were getting out of the car, they were shocked to see a large gray figure, bigger than man, rising up from the ground nearby, which they described as had horrifying, terrible, glowing red eyes. Marcella was so alarmed that she forgot that she was carrying her baby and dropped her daughter onto the ground. When she finally collected herself and her child, she ran to the Thompson home and was led in by one of their children. The creature shuffled along behind them and continued to torment the house by peering in through all the windows. They called the police. But of course, by the time the police arrived, a little over half an hour later, the creature had vanished. But Marcella reported later that this was not the last time she saw the creature. She also lived on the outskirts of town. And over the next few weeks, she noticed and heard the cry of screams of the ladies, and the creature appeared at her home several more times, giving the blood-curdling scream in the dead of the night. Marcella apparently suffers from nightmares and is still going through psychological help or obtaining such psychological help even to today. She lived near the TNT area of Mount Pleasant, and this would later become heavily associated with the so-called Mothman. The TNT area is a large tract of land dotted with small concrete igloos. It was used during World War II to store ammunition. It is also adjacent to a wildlife sanctuary, and the entire landscape is covered with dense forest, steep hills, and riddled with tunnels. The press would go on later to claim that the area attached to the TNT would be the home of the so-called Mothman. It was seen a lot during that period of time in and around that area. During the November month of 1966, the Silver River Bridge over the Ohio River collapsed, plunging a number of vehicles into the icy depths and killing 46 people in the process. Immediately after the bridge collapsed, sightings of the Mothman ceased altogether. And this led many of the people to believe that the creature was associated somehow with the tragedy. Others believed the Mothman was there to warn residents of the upcoming tragedy. So who or what is the Mothman? There were multiple sightings in the area by different people who had not reported sightings by the other individuals at the time that they became aware of the entity. It would be hard for a group of people which had no contact with one another to describe the same entity to the T without conversing with one another. The witnesses took great issue with the crane explanation, saying that was what they saw was definitely not a bird, and they could and do know the difference. One theory which has come out of Point Pleasant's experience is that the Mothman is a symbol of impending doom. Mothman has been seen throughout history during times of, I guess you would say, impending doom. It was seen in New York, reported just prior to the collapse of the towers. It was seen in Russia just prior to the explosion of the power plant. So, as I've said before, this creature's allegedly been seen all over the world. And it appears just before tragedy. There has been numerous sightings of the Mothman in parts of South and Central America. In these small areas and with the population there, they have never heard of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, so there's no way that they could associate what they're seeing and given details as they give the details as we see from Point Pleasant. Some believers theorize that the Mothman was actually an extraterrestrial in origin. And just before the first Mothman sighting, a sewing machine salesman that was traveling on I-77, not far from the area of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, reported encountering a UFO which stopped his vehicle. Another great fact is that not many people know that many of the residents of Point Pleasant reported paranormal activity in their homes during the time period that there were sightings, and all these paranormal activities ceased to exist after the bridge collapsed. You know, prior to the movie The Men in Black, there were people that showed up in the area of Point Pleasant wearing dark clothes. asking a lot of questions, trying to get individual statements. Now, after the movie, these so-called men were named the Men in Black, but apparently they were government agents trying to look into the situation or going forward with their investigation, which we're not aware of. So, whoever or whatever the Mothman is, there's no doubt that something strange was going on in a small city on the banks of the Ohio River during the late 1960s. Whether you believe or disbelieve, you have to admit there is something out there that we can't absolutely prove or disprove, whether from space or a parallel universe. Can this entity see the future? Is Mothman trying to communicate with us in a way that we can't understand yet? Let me assure you, the Mothman podcast will continue to investigate and provide answers as they make themselves available to us. We will have more episodes on the Mothman. That's a brief history. So, I'm not claiming to see the future, but I am claiming to be the Mothman. I'm Darrell, and I hope you liked tonight's episode. Good night.